Hi everybody, it's Professor Hernandez. Welcome back to another episode 2 of Ask the Professor. First of all, I want to thank everybody for tuning in to episode 1. We did receive a lot of your suggestions, a lot of the feedback that you guys sent into that, and I really appreciate it. As you can see, we have changed the angles a little bit. We're a little more centered now, which looks a little bit better, I think. We have some better lights in here now, and it doesn't look so dark and so like morose. Looks like a Halloween episode on that first episode, but I really appreciate it, guys. So thank you for all of that. That is always welcome. So if you have any other feedback, any other suggestions that maybe I could incorporate into this recordings, feel free to go ahead and send those in. You can locate me on Instagram once again, Ask the Prof with 2 F's. That's Ask the Prof. That's all social medias, actually, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. And you can also send your questions into questions@asktheprofessor.net. All right. So, guys, thank you all for tuning in to this episode. We have a couple of questions that came in, and that's something that I wanted to talk about, which is I really appreciate some of the people that have been sending questions. I know that if you follow me on Instagram, I went on a little bit of a rant about certain things, specifically content. I got somebody reached out to me from one of these pages that helps you grow your social media and things like that. And they were asking me, well, if you want to grow your social media, you have to put out some more content. You have to be posting content constantly all the time. And it really got me thinking about it because, while I do want to grow and have a bigger reach to help people, my goal when I started this as the professor was not to become some sort of social media motivational speaker. I didn't set out to be like an Instagram influencer or anything like that. My only goal was just to be able to help people and provide some sort of professional advice to people who didn't have access to that on their regular daily life. So while I do think it's important for me to build a brand or build the content that I have, I don't want to just put out videos just for the sake of it. And I don't want to just talk if I have nothing to say, which is something else that I'm going to be touching on in this podcast, which is the podcasts that are the videos that I'm putting out. They're mostly driven, or they're going to be almost entirely driven by user questions. So the more questions that you guys send in, the longer these episodes would be. The more questions that I'm able to answer and help people with, the longer these videos are going to be. So this week I think we got a couple of questions, maybe like 2 or 3. 2. So 2 questions that I will be touching on that I came in from, one from an anonymous source and another one from this guy named Tony. So we're going to be answering those questions a little bit later on. But let me touch base real quick on the whole thing that happened on my Instagram and why I went on this long angry rant. And it wasn't really an angry rant as much as just me kind of blowing off some steam, which for some reason today has been a little bit of a angry day for me. This is the second or third time that we started recording this video today. The first time that we started recording it, I think we didn't make it to 2 or 3 minutes before I went into this crazy angry rant. My recording guy was like, yeah, that's not good. You got to cut that out, man. So then we started again, and then the second run, I think we made it into 2 or 3 minutes. So I don't know. My mind's been going into this dark place today, and I've just been ranting about stuff. But it's not really that I'm angry about things. It's just that maybe it's just I get really passionate about certain things, and when I start explaining my point, I just kind of get really hyped and fired up about stuff, and it just comes out as angry. So I'm trying to tune it down a little bit for this attempt at the recording. But anyway, so somebody reached out to me from one of these pages that helps you grow your social media and things like that, and they were telling me, oh, you got to put out content. So I replied to them, well, listen, my goal is not to become a motivational speaker of sorts. I have this gripe, this net issue with motivational speakers. It's just that I don't see, or I don't like some of the stuff that they say, or maybe the way they say it. I feel like a lot of times they tell you things that sort of kind of program you the wrong way. So a lot of times these motivational speakers will kind of sit there and tell you, okay, well, you gotta learn how to fail. You gotta love to fail. You gotta fail 100 times before you succeed one time. And while that's all true and sure is a process and this and that, from a psychological point of view, when you're telling somebody that you have to learn how to love to fail and you have to fail all the time, fail, 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 a lot of people that are watching those videos and that are turning to those people for advice, they're not getting the message that the motivational speakers are trying to get out. What they're getting from these motivational speakers is, oh, well, I need to fail in order to succeed, right? Because that's the message almost that is getting picked up from these motivational speakers, from these influencers. Fail so then you can accomplish something else, right? So it's like steps. Okay, step number one, fail. Then if you failed, you'll get to step number two. When really, from a psychological point of view, you should be aiming to succeed. And then if you fail, then you learn from that, right? That's just one of the many examples that for me, I don't like I said, I don't have anything against them. I just don't personally follow their philosophy. I don't personally like to follow the advice that they put out sometimes, just because I understand the mechanics behind it in a way. And my problem with it is that a lot of people are looking at, very successful entrepreneurs and very successful motivational speakers, and they're saying, yeah, well, you have to love the grind, you got to love the hustle, you got to hustle, you got to do this, you got to do that. So these people are thinking, well, if I'm working all the time, if I'm busting my butt, 12 hours, 16 hours a day, that means I'm successful. It means you're working. It means you're putting in 16 hours a day worth of work. What's the end goal, right? When somebody tells you hustle, 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 fall in love with the hustle, fall in love with the game, fall in love with the process. Yeah, sure, but what's the end goal? Do you have a goal? Do you have a finish line that you want to get to? That's what people should be focusing on, I think. You should be focusing on what's my end goal, what's my finish line, what is my purpose, or where's my end? What am I working towards? That's what you should be aiming for, not just falling into this little hamster wheel of just hustle, hustle, and grind and grind and grind, right? Same with the failing thing. You should be aiming to succeed, but then if you just happen to fail, then you learn from it and then you get up and try it again. But don't specifically set out to fail, which is what a lot of these people are doing. So that was just what, not to repeat my rant on Instagram again, but it's kind of happened. That's what I replied in shorter words, basically, to this person that reached out to me, and why I just don't put out a lot of content on my social media just to put out something. All right, Zeke. So that was question one, and I just wanted to mention that because that's one of the things I got that came in on Instagram, and it's actually not the only time that somebody's reached out to me to try to help me grow my account. I got like 5 different emails on the website email from these 1,000 follower accounts saying, oh, well, if you like our page, we'll get 2,000 more followers, which to me is just ridiculous. But anyways, Zeke, did we get any more questions? Can you put those up on the screen?
We have one from Anonymous.
Okay.
Right over here.
All right. So is an anonymous source. It says, okay. It says, hello, Professor Hernandez. My girlfriend's son was diagnosed with ADHD, and they are prescribing him Adderall. Ooh. He is only 4 years old, though, and I don't think that he should be on medication so young. Do you have any advice? Yeah, my advice would be to get a second opinion because, 4-year-old getting put in Adderall, that's kind of intense. And I don't think they specify. Yeah, they don't specify if this is their primary care physician or their psychologist, but I would suggest maybe getting a second opinion from a psychiatrist or even having or going to like a mental health agency, because a lot of times I know that primary care physicians will just hand out prescriptions, and it sounds bad to say like that, but that's what happens, unfortunately. So my suggestion to this person would be to get your girlfriend's son evaluated by a psychiatrist, go to an actual mental health agency or facility where they can do a proper a mental health evaluation and figure out what it is that this kid actually needs. Now, there's a couple of things here. He's 4 years old, he said, right? So, yeah, he's 4 years old. 4-year-old kids, for the most part, are going to be very hyperactive. That is just normal kid behavior. And that's one big problem that I have with this industry, that everything doesn't have to be a diagnosis. And that's another rant for another day, where people are romanticizing mental health, but I'll leave that for later. But 4-year-old kids, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old kids are usually going to be very hyperactive, very inattentive. And the only real cure to that is just having them waste all that energy, right? If you have a 4-year-old kid that's diagnosed with ADHD, just make him run laps. Literally go outside and say, hey, let's play fetch. And you throw the ball and you make them play fetch just to waste some of that energy. Guarantee you that kid's going to come back inside and be chill and quiet and calm and go to sleep on time. He's going to be very not ADHD after that. Another thing to consider too, a lot of time kids with ADHD, supposed ADHD, is kids that feel like they're not challenged academically, right? So if you get complaints from your teacher saying, oh, the kid is not paying attention, he's distracting others, he's just, disturbing the class, maybe it's because the kid feels bored about what the topic is in the class. So try to maybe challenge him in a different way, stimulate him mentally a little bit more with some more challenging topics. If depending if he's a 4-year-old, I don't, what grade will he be in? Probably not even in school yet, or maybe pre-K or something like that. Maybe give him something a little bit more challenging, some type of bigger puzzles, or just something else that they could do to challenge them mentally. I've had cases before that I worked in, or that I've worked with, where the kid, he was an older kid, 14 years old, and he said that he was just bored in class and he just didn't want to do any other work, so he would just distract other people. It turns out that this kid was actually a gifted child. He should have been in a way higher level than he was. The second they put him into a higher level class, this kid was focused, he was on point, he was answering questions, he was researching, he was studying. All of a sudden his ADHD went away because he was being stimulated mentally, and his focus and attention completely improved, and he started doing way better. So that's my suggestion for this person, anonymous person. First of all, have an evaluation by another doctor, by a psychiatrist, preferably mental health institution, counseling agency, whatever you can find. And then if that doesn't work, or if you don't want to go that route, then just maybe talk to the school, maybe challenge him some more mentally, physically, academically. Try to waste some of that energy, and literally just make him fetch. That works all the time. I watched this show on TV, Shameless, and in one of the later seasons, one of the guys, he has twins, and he said, man, these twins won't go to sleep. What should I do? He literally grabs the ball and he takes him outside. He says, all right, go fetch, go run. And that works for him, and that works for them, and that's going to work for your kid as well. So if I would have grown up in this country, they would have definitely put me on medication, because I was a very hyperactive kid. But what my parents did, they put me on 5 different sports, and even though I don't look like it now, I was burning calories and burning energy all the time when I was young, and that actually helped me out a lot. So that's my suggestion for you, listener. Have your kid evaluated again and get some second or third opinions. All right. Any more questions, Zeke?
One more from Tony.
Okay, so next question from Tony. It says, hello, Professor Hernandez. My name is Tony, and I wanted to see if you can share with the listeners some other ways to get information for themselves. I do research for my university, and I've learned to look for peer-reviewed articles. However, I feel like oftentimes people will not bother researching things further on their own. Do you have any suggestions? That is a really good question, Tony. I appreciate you sending that in. That is actually something that I preach about all the time, and I always talk to my students and my clients. Personal responsibility is a really big thing for me. And when it comes to researching information on your own, I don't think he meant this in any sort of political way or anything like that. But I have noticed, especially with the climate that we have in this country right now, a lot of times people would prefer, or they would, it's easier for them to just kind of grab whatever news comes at them, say on Facebook or something, instead of actually going into some factual research, right? And that happens a lot of times too when it comes to scientific information. I've had students that come into my class and say, "Oh, well, I read somewhere that blah blah blah," and I'm like, "Well, where do you hear that from?" And they're like, "Oh, well, I saw it on some website," and they just stay with that information and they just assume that it's factual information when a lot of times is not factual information at all. So I would say, one of the ways that I get my information, especially when it comes to research. I mean, you look for peer reviewed journal articles. I use PubMed. That's a website that has tons of free articles that you can locate, and I link that to my students, and we can probably put a link or something in the description if anybody would like to find some more scientifically oriented documentation, linkage, and articles and things like that. PubMed is a great resource for me. You also, if you're in school, if you're in college, or if you have access to any sort of university database, that's also a great source. You can always find articles and research, clinical trials, things like that on your university's faculty, or not faculty, university's library and database. But when it comes to more of the day to day, like current event, mundane information, I would always just suggest to maybe look into a few different sources. I do feel like our news are very polarized right now. If you read CNN versus if you read Fox News, as two different stories, even though it's about the same thing, they give you just two completely different uh, points of views, two completely different biases. So I would just suggest maybe going into more than one source. So if you read something on Fox News, then go ahead and read it on CNN, and then go read it in some other non-partisan, Al Jazeera or whatever other news organization is. And don't get your information from Reddit. Okay, don't get your information from Facebook. Please avoid getting your information from just post boards and things like that. A lot of times those are not very reliable. Um, and it's just something, it's kind of a weird situation that I'm encountering where people would prefer to believe, for example, YouTube videos versus actual scientific research. And I'm looking at you, flat Earth believers. Okay, I'm sorry if I'm alienating anybody here, but it's really easy for you to say, "Oh, well, this guy on YouTube said the Earth is flat, and he gave me all this information, so I'm just gonna believe that." Versus you actually, believing scientific research that has been done. So that's just what I think, and that's my suggestion for the listeners and for Tony. It seems like he does research, so he probably knows what to look for. But for the listeners, if you do see information out there that you're just not too sure about, or just any information, question everything. Try to question everything. That's how you learn stuff. Learning happens when you start questioning something. Everything has ever been made is or started from somebody questioning something, right? So question everything, any info that you get, try to question it. I just last night I watched the stand-up comedy from Tom Segura. He's actually one of my favorite comedians. So if you listen to this, Tom Segura, I love you. But he has this really funny joke about how his father told him when he was young that Tommy Lee Jones was gay. And he went through his life saying that to everybody he ever met. And at one point, he said, "Hey, man, did you know," to somebody else, he said, "Hey, man, did you know Tommy Lee Jones is gay?" And the other guy was like, "No, he's not." He's like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Yeah, well, my dad said he was." And the other guy was like, "He's absolutely not." So then he went back to his father and he said, "Hey, did you know Tommy Lee Jones is not gay?" And his father was like, "Oh, well, I thought he was." And that was the end of it. So that's a good example in that joke. I don't know why I thought it was so funny. But that's a good example of why you shouldn't just stick with information that somebody else gives you. Always try to do your own research to avoid situations like Tom Segura got himself into, where he went around most of his life thinking that somebody else was something that they were not. So thank you, Tony, for your question. Again, PubMed is the number one or go-to search engine that I use to find my articles and peer-reviewed information. And there's tons of other ones. If you use your university's database, you can also use reference websites and things like that, where you'll be able to find more information. All right. Was that it, Zeke? Is that all the questions that came in? All right. Well, guys, I appreciate you all tuning in to episode 2. Like I said, I did have some other topics. I had a bunch of other things that I wanted to talk about, but it seemed like it was a little too hot for me to get into those topics on this episode. Something's going on with me. I'm not sure. I'm just very, very heated at this moment. And I'll leave those topics for another time when things cool down in my head a little bit. But once again, everybody, thank you all for tuning in. Remember, if you would like to see some more frequent posts and things like that, I am trying to make an active effort to post more on social media. Ask the Prof with 2 F's. Put those links up and send your questions in to questions@asktheprofessor.net, guys. Remember, this is for you. My only goal with this whole channel, this whole videos, is to help anybody that has questions and just to provide people with a service that they can get some professional advice and opinions on free of charge. So send those questions in, guys. The more questions you get, the longer the episodes will be, the more interesting topics that we'll be able to get into. But that's it for this week, right? So we got those questions in, and I look forward to the next one, everybody. So remember, if you have any questions, ask the professor. Have a good one.